Good afternoon and welcome to the Landscape Conservation Catalyst Fund webinar. My name is Emily Bateson, and joining me are Melly Ruling, Deputy Director of the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and John Peterson, who is the Catalyst Fund Manager. During this call, we're going to spend about 15 or 20 minutes providing an overview of the network and the Catalyst Fund, and the remaining time will be dedicated to responding to any questions you may have. We'll start with a series of questions submitted via the registration process, and then we'll turn to questions submitted during the webinar itself. To submit questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A icon in your webinar toolbar. If you're having any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat icon to direct questions to the host, John, who will attempt to resolve any issues you may have. Some brief background. The network formed in 2011 to help support and advance the growing field of collaborative landscape conservation. We work to connect landscape conservation practitioners to the best resources, tools, and to each other, so that we continue to learn from each other and innovate collectively in the field. Our geographically diverse 34-person leadership team has representatives from the nonprofit, academic, private landowner, tribal, and state and federal agency communities in the US, Canada, and Mexico. The network is fiscally sponsored project of the Center for Large Landscape Conservation in Bozeman, Montana, who is also administering the fund. Our website highlights a number of resources and initiatives that you may find helpful in your work, including our bi-monthly e-bulletin, a survey we conducted of landscape conservation initiatives in 2017 that highlights a number of important trends in the field, and the report Pathways Forward, Progress and Priorities in Landscape Conservation. This report captures the strategic thinking, inspiring case studies, and recent innovations in the field from the National Forum in Landscape Conservation, a gathering of 200 landscape conservation leaders we convened in the fall of 2017. Both of these reports capture a fundamental shift in conservation. People are increasingly working at the larger landscape scale, the scale that nature functions. And people are working collaboratively in community-grounded partnerships to do so. Cross-sector, place-based collaboration is the linchpin of effective landscape conservation. This horizontal partnership approach has proven highly effective, but such collaboration takes considerable time and effort, and funding for the collaborative process that leads to enduring conservation outcomes has been scarce. The purpose of the Catalyst Fund is to address that central need and to support the key building block activities and collaborative processes that move collaborative landscape conservation partnerships forward. This fund is made possible through the generous funding of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. The Catalyst Fund has two primary eligibility criteria. First, applicants must be 501c3 organizations, and they must be within the 50 states of the United States. Second, you must be applying on behalf of a landscape conservation partnership. Now, an important note, we recognize that most partnerships are informal collaboratives, and few, if any, will in fact be themselves 501c3 nonprofit organizations. We anticipate that most applicants will be applying on behalf of a partnership because they are the fiscal sponsor organization of the partnership, the recognized lead convener of the partnership, or a recognized partner organization within the partnership. So please know that is absolutely fine. Other involved partners, whether they're tribal governments, academic institutions, other nonprofits, may work on the funded grant activities as paid contractors. We recognize recognize that there's a wide spectrum of landscape conservation initiatives emerging and underway across the country, and not all initiatives, regardless of their broader importance or relevance, will meet the landscape conservation definition of the Catalyst Fund. But as specified in our RFP, we define landscape conservation partnerships as place-based, focused on a shared long-term vision, collaboratively governed, inclusive, and informed, committed to building a shared foundation of knowledge to achieve conservation outcomes. There is more specific language, as you see on this screen, regarding these definitions, and we recommend that you read this eligibility section quite carefully. Strong proposals to the Catalyst Fund will come from place-based partnership with clearly identified vision and goals. They will clearly articulate grant period objectives for building the partnership and advancing those goals. They will be focused on specific activities that best achieve the objectives. And they will also articulate how the grant will significantly advance partnership goals and catalyze forward momentum. This is not a one-off grant period. We're looking for forward momentum as you build your enduring partnership. The Catalyst Fund Appendix identifies 3 stages of partnership growth: starting, building, and conserving. The fund is targeting primarily landscape conservation partnerships in the building stage. We would like to see partnerships where people have spent the time to build the trust, establish relationships, and develop a vision and goal statement for their shared landscape. This building stage is often the stage at which volunteer time of the partnership is no longer enough to sustain and build the partnership, and when funding to advance the collaborative process and specific building block activities will land on fertile ground, solidifying group momentum and accelerating forward progress. So we encourage you to look at that chart carefully, but please know this is our best effort to synthesize best practices of effective partnerships to date. It is intended to be helpful, but not prescriptive. You should tell us in your applications what you think in your landscape will be the most impactful set of activities that you can do in the grant period to build your partnership and achieve forward momentum towards your conservation goals. For the 2019 grant cycle, the Catalyst Fund will consider 2 types of proposals. 1, our general Catalyst Fund RFP is open to all eligible landscape conservation partnerships in the United States. 2, we have an Indigenous Community Catalyst Fund RFP, and that is open to all eligible landscape conservation partnerships that are Indigenous-led and primarily serving Indigenous communities. We are very pleased to have a portion of the fund dedicated to Indigenous-led partnerships. Indigenous collaboratives are often rich with qualities that embody and enhance landscape conservation, such as a multi-generational approach, the use of traditional knowledge, integration of other important societal issues, and a value system that prioritizes symbiotic health between landscapes and its inhabitants. So Indigenous partnerships could focus on a landscape that is wholly on sovereign tribal land, that includes adjoining lands due to the boundaries of an ecological landscape or other cultural societal considerations, and or that focuses on advancing and conserving Indigenous interests, territories, and rights across a specific landscape. So please know that the objectives for both programs are the same, but applicants that meet the Indigenous Community RFP eligibility guidelines can apply through a separate, more streamlined application process. Another small difference is that match funding is desired but not required for Indigenous community applicants, whereas in the general RFP, a minimum 1-to-1 match is required. We are currently accepting requests ranging in size from $10,000 to $25,000 in total. We have an annual grant cycle, but no one grantee is eligible for more than $25,000 total over the first 3 years of the program. Please note that the deadline for pre-proposals is Friday, April 26th. To apply, please register on our online application portal through our website and continue the pre-proposal form there. If you have any questions or challenges using the portal, please contact John or myself through email. Please review the applicable RFP for more details. The funding can be used for staff or contract support for convening and coordination and moving forward the many collaborative processes necessary to advance a partnership. And grant monies can also be used for direct project costs, such as communication and outreach activities, convening costs, conservation, prioritization exercises, and so forth. There's a list of specific activities that funding cannot be used for, listed here on the slide. Please review the RFP carefully and be in touch if you have any questions on eligibility and what's appropriate. I'm going to turn now to the questions that were submitted during the registration process, and then we are going to turn to the questions that you have inserted during this presentation. The first question is, can a 501c3 organization submit more than one proposal so long as they are for different geographies and different partnerships? And a number of people asked this question. I would say that the answer is we are really looking at partnership building and advancing forward momentum and progress towards conservation outcomes. If the lead partner in several cases happens to be the same organization, that will not disqualify you. We'll be looking at the quality of the partnership and the quality of the proposal. That being said, we are dispersing $335,000 in year one. So we will be looking for geographical, organizational, and partnership diversity. 2, if a tribe or other doesn't have a 501c3, how do you recommend they apply? We understand that tribes have very specific IRS issues. Unfortunately, we are constrained by our foundations. We must give to 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So tribal or other applicants who have issues there will have to find a 501c3 partner to apply. Third question, what factors should we consider when requesting a 2 or 1 year grant? Is it better to apply for 1 year at a time or 2 years? That's an excellent question. And I would suggest that as you develop your proposals, you be in touch with John or myself. I feel that in many cases, a 2-year progression is going to look very strong. But if you're really not sure what you want to do in the second year, it will be better to apply for 1 and then come back with a stronger case of what you need to do in the second year. So I'm sorry, it's a bit case by case. So again, you're welcome to contact us by email. 4, how formal do the partnerships need to be in order to apply? If we don't have a formal structure or leadership, is that a problem? We understand that partnerships will be in different levels of maturation. And in fact, we're asking particularly to help partnerships in the building stage, which is a fairly early stage. So if it's not highly formal, that will be absolutely okay. But what all of our experts suggested when we built this program is that we want to fund partnerships who have put in the sweat equity to build the trust, build relationships, build a vision statement. So we're investing in partnerships where the stakeholders and the people around the table have done enough work that they know they want to move forward, they know how to move forward, but they don't yet have the funds to do so. 5, if a partnership was previously in a conserving stage but has been largely inactive, can it be considered to be back in the building stage if efforts are underway to reinvigorate? The answer is yes. But make a strong case for how you're invigorating, again, the sweat equity that we're investing in something that's going to take root, and you will be eligible. 6, how narrow should the scope of projects be? Can we combine projects that have similar goals into a package, or should we stick to one single project? We are fine with multiple projects, and this was hard to perhaps articulate in the RFP, but we understand that building a partnership can involve one mega project for 12 months. We are going to do a conservation prioritization project, and we're going to need 6 meetings and money for a GIS expert, etc. But there are many partnerships where you've exhausted what you can do through early volunteer commitment, and you need a coordinator part-time to convene a number of meetings, move forward the governance structure, start an e-news, and do a number of different partnership building and conservation activity building tasks. So multiple activities within one grant request is absolutely fine. 7, would seascape conservation projects be considered? I am so sorry, but at this time, this is really a terrestrial or coastal landscape conservation program. 8, I'd like to hear the types of conservation measures that were included. Could we do a wild and scenic river campaign? Could you clarify what types of work are considered political advocacy? We are not really looking for political campaigns around wild and scenic rivers or others, but I would suggest, if you have any doubt, that you email John or me directly. As you know, this is the first year of this grant program. It's an exciting time, but it's a complicated field. And as you push us, we will all learn together and refine the program going forward. So that is the end of the pre-registered questions. I'd like to turn to John to read the questions that have come in during the call.
Yeah, great. We have a half dozen or slightly more questions that have come in, and I'm going to start with this one, Emily. Can you share an example of a project that would meet the Catalyst Fund definition of landscape conservation partnership?
Oh my goodness. That is a very broad question. I think people who are unsure what a landscape conservation partnership is might go to our website and leaf through our newest report, Pathways Forward, because it shares a number of case studies of specific place-based conservation partnerships, whether it's the Heart of the Rockies initiative in the West, or the North Quabbin Partnership in the East, or the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership in the Mid-Atlantic. There are some wonderful examples there that I think will give you a better sense of the kind of enduring partnerships and horizontal collaboratives that we're trying to fund and really build enduring social capital and conservation outcomes on the landscape.
Great. Next question is in a similar vein, Emily, and it's about partnership size. Is there such a thing as too many partners? Or would you be hesitant to work in landscapes that have a large number of partners?
I don't see a problem with that. We actually, as a network, we try not to use the term large landscape conservation because we feel that collaborative landscape conservation is an approach that doesn't have anything to do with number of acres or partners. There are a lot of wonderful partnerships that are urban in nature. That are some that are sort of suburban, or there's certainly some in New England where our scale is smaller that perhaps the Intermountain states would consider quite tiny. So I think we'll sort of like t-shirts, we'll take them in all sizes, but we'll really be looking at the evaluation criteria in the RFP. Do you have clear vision and goals? Are you recommending a year or 2-year set of activities that will advance those goals measurably and leave you better set up for the years to come?
Great. Next question. There's a couple questions around match, Emily. Can state and federal funds be used for match? And then are there any guidelines or caps on in-kind direct cost rates when thinking about match?
Yeah, no, thank you. Great question. And we wrestled with match because we're telling partnerships this money is really hard to find. We want to help you build coordination and capacity, but we are requiring a match for a couple of reasons. One is we would like to see partners putting in work around building the partnership. So we allow 50% of the match to be in kind. That's if partners, offer space for convening, if they put in the time, all of that counts. Those are indispensable parts of building a partnership. The other 50% should be a cash match, and that can be federal or state funding, other philanthropic sources. It can be cash match or partnership dues from your own partners. It does not have to be in hand when you apply, but you should list where you expect to find that money. And no second year or additional grants would be issued until that money is procured. And really the major reason for having that cash match is, again, we're looking to help partnerships build something enduring in their landscape. So we want them to be able to go out to their local and regional funders and partners and leverage Catalyst Fund monies to find that additional interest.
Great. Next, Emily, we have a question about nested and overlapping landscapes and conservation partnerships within those. How would the Catalyst Fund view that arrangement? Would it be a positive or negative factor to be nested within, or have other landscape conservation initiatives nested within your application?
Yeah, another great question. And I do encourage you all to read our survey report, one of the two reports I put up on the screen earlier. We surveyed almost 150 landscape conservation partnerships last year, and the survey report pulls out 10 major trends. And we do ask, are you nested within a partnership, or do you have partnerships nested within yours? And it turns out that most partnerships are nested in some way because, in fact, as we move to conservation at scale, we have to work at multiple scales. So you have to work at your local scale and your more regional scale, and you have to connect to the other regions. So this is very typical of partnerships, and you might have to contact us directly to get more specific, but we certainly appreciate and expect that partnerships will be nested on the landscape.
Great. Can a staff person for the requesting organization receive funds towards salary if they are the dedicated coordinator of this partnership?
Yes.
And what is the expected timeline for projects, including start date and fund availability?
The timeline was shown earlier on a screen. It's in the RFP, but we expect that final grant decisions will be made by August 15th, and monies will be distributed, on or shortly after that time.
A couple related questions here, Emily. I'm going to try to thread the needle and weave them together. Regarding the prioritization of eligible products or projects in the RFP, is the funding to support priority activities and or the funding to support capacity building in a broad sense? Is there a prioritization order there? And as connected to that, is it required to show on the ground landscape conservation activities within the grant period, or can we focus on furthering collaboration?
We do not have a prioritization between partnership building and specific activities. We want you to tell us, the applicants to tell us, here on our landscape, given our conservation vision goals, this is the most impactful thing we can do over the next year. And in some cases, it will be, if we bring in a part-time coordinator, we can do X, Y, and Z, and people will come to the table, and we will advance this conversation, and we'll establish our conservation priorities, and maybe we'll do some partnership outreach and a couple of tracking courses, whatever it might be. So we want you to tell us. This is not a cookie cutter field, as you all know. This is highly complicated, and we're all figuring it out together. And John, the second part of the question was something else.
Yeah, it was essentially, here, I have it again, do we need to have on-the-ground landscape conservation activities within the grant period, or can we focus on furthering collaboration?
Yeah. No, you can absolutely focus on furthering collaboration, because building trust and relationships and stakeholder involvement, is in fact building that foundation to have conservation success. So we'd like you to connect those dots. We didn't want to just, throw money out there, but if you say it's really important for us to do X, Y, and Z and have these meetings and reach these stakeholders, and that's going to set us up well because 50% of our landscape is farmland and we're not reaching those owners and blah, blah, blah. As long as you connect those dots, that to our mind is partnership building with conservation outcomes firmly in mind.
We have another question regarding the appropriateness of using funding from the Catalyst Fund to build skills among early career professionals, including graduate students who are involved with the partnership we work with.
Probably not, but the person who wrote that question might email us specifically so we understand better, what's intended. I'm guessing no, but please be in touch.
Looking through questions, and I think the majority of the questions we've received have been covered at this point. Here's a question, Emily. Would it be appropriate to propose use of funding to support the time and participation of underrepresented groups in our partnership?
Yes, I think that building the partnership, reaching out to new stakeholders in a meaningful, inclusive way, bringing in underserved populations who have been not well represented sometimes in conservation to date, could certainly be an important partnership building activity.
Would the aid of an environmental planning consultant be an eligible expense in a proposal?
The aid of an environmental consultant? Did I get that right?
Environmental planning consultant. So essentially contract support.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely depends, what for, but we absolutely envision that these monies could be used for contract staff, coordination staff, expert staff, as long as you're connecting the dots to, we need this because it will increase the, we want these partnerships, as we say in the definition, to be informed. We expect them to be working together to develop a shared base of knowledge, science-informed conservation plan. If you need to bring in a contractor to provide pieces of knowledge to advance your partnership, just put forth your rationale of why that's what you need at this time. But I would see that as quite eligible. I'll throw out a question I've heard along the way, but I haven't seen it today, which is partnerships who say, we are working with Indigenous communities, but we are not Indigenous community led ourselves, but we're making important connections back and forth across this shared landscape. And, those sound like wonderful opportunities. Those applicants should simply apply through the general RFP process. And we will take the value of that partnership certainly under consideration.
I have a couple additional questions about match, Emily, and just for clarity, I'll ask them. Does match funding need to be secured during the lifespan of the grant cycle, or can previously secured funding that's already in hand be utilized as match?
It can be utilized as long as it hasn't yet been spent.
And a somewhat related question. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. Can staff salary count as match, and how would that factor into match?
That would be an in-kind contribution of time.
We have a question about the timeline again. Would the expectation be that the work would begin in September? And how would that align with ongoing efforts that are already underway before then?
Well, I think that could be negotiable, and applicants should just be clear when they apply. And we're happy to talk this through. We would like this to work for applicants, so we will be as flexible as we can be.
We have a series of questions that sort of dance around the notion of partnership life cycle stage, Emily. So I wonder if maybe just a moment of additional clarification on that and might be helpful. So where is the prioritization within the Catalyst Fund, within the various stages of partnership life cycle that we identify in the appendix? And is that a strict definition and restriction, or is there some flexibility within that prioritization?
I would say there is flexibility. This is not an exact science. And in crafting that chart, we did our best to say, this field is 20 years old. Many effective partnerships seem to have shared best practices. Here's the many stages that they seem to go through, and we cite the sources for that chart. And on the other hand, each partnership has to work within the partners and the geography and the situation and the conservation goals of its own landscape. And so we are trying to be flexible, and yet articulating that we would like to see some clear strategic thinking when you come to us with an application. I would say one place where we have less flexibility would be at the starting stage. As I mentioned earlier, we talked to many landscape conservation leaders in developing this program who independently said, do not fund at the day one stage. People really need time to come together, build trust, build relationships, discuss why they're sitting around the table, what goals is it they share, do they have a collective vision for the landscape, do they have some goals that they would like to advance together. That should not be funded by an outside partner. That has to come from the people who choose to to come to that table. And then our funding should happen after that. It's like, you guys have come a long way. You have a vision and goals. You have an exciting partnership coming together. Here is some funding because you've reached the end of what you can potentially do on a volunteer basis. So that is where we have less flexibility. We want to fund at the building stage, but the line between building and conserving is a bit subjective. So, come to us by email, tell us what you'd like to do, and we can have a case-by-case discussion.
Great, thanks, Emma. I think that's really helpful and addressed a number of questions that had come in. A series of questions around what's entailed within landscape conservation, and are we making a distinction between conservation versus land management and or stewardship? And are those type of projects that are more stewardship based or direct land management based, would those be eligible within the Catalyst Fund?
Well, we are looking for partnerships that are moving towards enduring conservation outcomes on the landscape. I'm not sure how to dig deeper into the definition of the words you just chose. So I would suggest whoever wrote those questions should email us directly.
And we have another question about size of request, and I think it's probably one that would just benefit from putting a point on it for clarity's sake. And a multi-year project of 2 years, is the cap 25,000 per year or 25,000 over a 2-year period?
Yes, so a proposal can be a 1 or 2 year proposal capped at $25,000. In addition, over the first 3 years of this grant program, one applicant may not receive more than $25,000 total. And so if an applicant applies for a $10,000 grant this year to do whatever, but doesn't feel ready to do a 2-year proposal, they could come back in year 3 and apply for another $15,000. But the total per applicant is capped at $25,000 in the first 3-year period. And I also want to say, I didn't mean to punt on the last question, but I find that stewardship has very different meanings by person and sometimes by region. And that's why I hesitate to answer broadly and would suggest that people contact John and me directly.
Great. We have a question about conservation goals and whether we're talking about conservation goals within a strict framework like a landscape conservation design framework, or conservation goals has a broader meaning within our fund.
I think it can be broader. We don't have a sort of a checklist that you have to have a certain document. If you read the FAQ, we've tried to outline a couple of questions of what is and what is not a partnership. And one thing we wanted to emphasize as we talked about conservation goals is that there are a certain number of conservation partnerships that come together for information sharing. And that's very valuable, to get together quarterly and the 6 groups in a region say, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing, hey, what's new, what's the legislature doing? And that's very valuable, but we wanted to make it clear what we want to fund is not information sharing networks, but networks or partnerships that are establishing shared goals and activities to achieve conservation outcomes on a landscape that they would not be able to do individually or alone.
Great, thanks, Emily. A couple of follow-up questions came in after the discussion about the maximum amount of funding available over the first 3 years of the fund. And just for clarity, is that per applicant or per landscape conservation partnership? So with the 25,000, the per partnership or per applicant organization?
Yes, I was thinking about that loophole as I spoke. It is per partnership, so you can't just kind of, keep passing the application around. And if more money comes in, we would be delighted to lift that cap.
That's great, thanks, Emily. I'm scrolling through. I encourage folks, if you haven't entered a question and have a desire to do so, please do so. But I think we've covered much of the ground that's been identified so far in the questions. Emily, there's another question here about indirect cost rates in the budget and any rules that are in place around indirect cost rates.
We don't have any specific rules. Perhaps we should. So, but we don't. I would suggest that if you have any questions, to be in touch. If you are challenged by the match, I suggest you be in touch. Obviously the point is to help you succeed. And so we would like to be as helpful and as flexible as we can going forward.
Great. Again, I'm scrolling through the questions and feel like we've covered much of the ground that's come in.
Wonderful.
Here's a question that just came in, Emily, and might be worth just a moment of attention. Do you see this as seed funding towards larger projects that require substantially more funding support?
I don't fully understand the question, but certainly the goal of this program is to be a catalyst to your partnership, to throw a little money at the partnership so that you can leverage it into bringing people together around low-hanging fruit activities, coordination and convening. But not only, a one-year thing, but to really build that momentum so people find additional funding, keep the partnership going. We did a fair amount of research on this in New England and elsewhere, and went around and talked to partnerships who said that when they were given small capacity building grants at the beginning of, or towards the beginning of their partnership, it really did build surprising momentum, and they just never looked back. Once you have real money on the table and can really move something tangibly forward, people become more invested, become more excited, and the partnership strengthens, and the partnership endures.
Yeah, I think that was helpful clarification, Emily. And I think I would just underscore that what we're really looking to invest in is partnerships and apologies for the intrusion. And I've lost my train of thought. The goal is to invest in partnerships, and we want to invest in partnerships that are enduring and working towards a longer vision that absolutely requires additional funding support and accelerated work in the future.
Yeah,
and again, apologies for the interruption.
We're not looking for a one-off. I think we just heard from future generations. So that's what we're thinking about. We're not thinking of one-off projects. I want to remind people we do have a lot of information on our website. We are available by email because we all know how frustrating it is if you don't quite understand what funders want. Please be in touch. We do have another webinar next Thursday at the same time. Again, the pre-proposal deadline is Friday, April 26th. We will be posting a recording of this webinar on the Catalyst Fund of our page of our website. So thank you for your participation today and your interest in the Catalyst Fund. And we very much look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again.